Though video games are often used as a way to provide escapism from real life, on occasion, one's real-life interests, hobbies, and even education can draw them to certain types of games. I'm no exception to this, and in fact, the game we are talking about falls into that niche for me. Medieval 2 Total War is a rather unique point within the wider Total War franchise, and while I hope to go deeper into that within this video, I can tell you that I fucking love this game. It's my favorite game in the series, and thus one of my favorite games of all time. In fact, I call it one of the 4 pillars that solidified my love of PC gaming, but it goes a bit deeper than that. Just like my past 2 videos focusing on games from my past, I want to underline the fact that I will be extremely biased in a lot of regards due to my undying love for this game, but I might be slightly more critical in certain other regards. Still, if I miss out anything that you wish I had talked about, feel free to mention it in the comments, as any discussion is welcome. Anyway, I'm the Phantom Merchant, and I'd like to welcome you to my shop. In 2012, my love of PC gaming came into full swing, as did my love of medieval history. Now, keep that second bit in mind, for that will become very important soon. By this point, I had racked up hundreds of hours in another game that I plan to talk about soon that fueled my love for the medieval era. Then I had heard of a game by the name of Medieval 2 Total War, and so I decided to look up a YouTube review on it, and I was quickly sold. Unfortunately, the YouTuber who set me onto this game, and eventually Total War as a whole, has since passed away, and I do wish I could have thanked them for introducing me to the game. In the review, I heard so much that sold me. Large cinematic battles of epic proportions, political intrigue with the Catholic hierarchy, invasions of the Mongols and Timurids, and the discovery of the New World. Seeing the footage of the battles only drew me in more, looking like something straight out of a movie with the sync kills and large regiments of men clashing into each other. Almost instantly, I went over to Steam and bought this game, and to say that I was blown away was an understatement. 17 playable factions in single player, 22 in custom battles and multiplayer, each with distinct rosters and flavors to them. I remember before I did anything else, I played the tutorial, and instantly I was already interested because we played one of the most interesting points in history for me, the Norman invasion of England, and more specifically the Battle of Hastings. I remember that around the time I had played very few RTS games, and this was my first RTS game that I ever played on PC, so that was even more worrying. My worries, however, seemed to melt pretty immediately, as it turned out that the game is extremely intuitive, with unit movements, map navigation, and the intricacies of combat being boiled down to a rock, paper, scissors style. I felt remarkably at home. After the tutorial, I started playing the game fully, and here I could only choose between one of 5 factions: the Kingdom of England, the Kingdom of France, the Serene Republic of Venice, the Holy Roman Empire, and Spain. For some reason. Okay, so this part of the video is going to be a lot different than the others. I mentioned this briefly in my first video, but I actually used to be a history major, specifically focusing on medieval history. Though some of my knowledge is a tad rusty thanks to inactivity, I still know a lot more than the average person, especially the average American. Now, when I first played this game at 16, I had read that there were quite a few historical inaccuracies, and I went in with that knowledge. After several years of reading through the intricacies of medieval history for both personal and academic reasons, I now realize I had no idea how much this game got wrong. At the risk of sounding extremely pedantic, I am going to list just a few examples. You have Scottish nobility in the early game being armed with two-handed swords, kilts, and Celtic influences, despite the fact that all 3 of those aspects are historically anachronistic to 11th and 12th century Scottish nobility. In fact, at the time, medieval Scottish armies were indistinguishable from English or most other Northern European troops. Speaking of troops, medieval armies, at the very least in the early period, were not recruited like Roman armies before or early modern professional armies later. A levy system was usually used to recruit as many able-bodied men as possible, and they would have to arm themselves out of pocket. Due to this, army quality varied greatly, and multi-thousand men armies were very rare. In fact, many battles were usually skirmishes between no more than a few hundred men. This didn't change until the high to late medieval eras, thanks to the advances in administrations. This is one of the key reasons why the First Crusade in the 1090s was so noticeable, because it had tens of thousands of men from all across Western Europe and several more non-combatants. Actually, while I'm on the topic of the Crusades, I don't know if this is a bug or not, but the Pope, without fail, always seems to call a crusade on the city of Cairo. This is hilarious, because for one thing, the Crusader states never actually attacked Cairo, and two, the First Crusade wasn't just called on Jerusalem because it was a cool-ass city. It had a lot of religious significance to all three Abrahamic faiths. Actually, while I'm on the topic of religion, I find it genuinely funny that the three playable Muslim factions are all uniquely borked in their own way. Egypt, the Moors, and the Turks simply do not make any sense as factions because in the 11th century, they were all different sultanates and caliphates, like the Fatimids and the Seljuks. I think this was done less as a representation of different countries and more to represent the overall history of the cultures in those regions. Hence why the Turks later on get Ottoman units, kind of like they did with Russia in Spain, which, well, all I'm going to say is that if you looked up the history of both countries, you will find their existence in 1080 is laughable at best. There are many other oversimplifications or flat out fabrications in this game, and you know what? I still fucking adore it despite that for two main reasons. This game has so much charm in the different voice lines for each of the characters on the open world map, in the awesome as hell battles that feel like they're in some sort of movie, even if the graphics have aged pretty terribly, and even the little cinematics that appear throughout the game. Oh, the music! The music is also fucking amazing, and I'm gonna show you because fuck being scared of copyright law. The second reason is there's still a lot of depth to this game without being too dense to wade through. As I mentioned briefly that the melee combat has a rock, paper, and scissors aspect to it. Heavy infantry can beat spearmen, spearmen can beat cavalry, cavalry can beat heavy infantry. That's true, but that doesn't factor in everything else that blurs the lines. Maybe you have a strong contingent of missiles that are able to whittle down cavalry so their charge is less impactful against your infantry. Maybe you're able to use expert maneuvering to keep your cavalry away from spears, splitting them off and enveloping them so their bonus against cavalry isn't so strong and they'll eventually die out. This only becomes more varied as gunpowder starts to flow in via cannons and handguns. The world map mechanics are less in depth. Weirdness aside, I do love the intricacies of the papacy gameplay. In fact, I like how depending on how much the Pope likes your faction, if you're Catholic, you can ask for him to call a crusade on Muslim or rebel-held cities. If you piss him off, you can become excommunicated, which means that other Catholic factions can attack you with no worries without angering him, and you might even have a crusade called upon you. If you play a Muslim, you have access to the jihad, but because the caliphate isn't really a factor, for some reason, you don't have to worry about fighting other Muslims. For some reason. It's not perfect, of course. Then you have the Eastern Orthodox Byzantium in Russia, who have no main religious mechanics, but can attack anybody without worry about excommunication. Though again, highly oversimplified for the sake of gameplay, I do genuinely credit this game for igniting my curiosity to the medieval era. And if I hadn't gotten into this game, I'm not sure I would have become a history major. I still love Total War, but some of the more streamlined aspects, the battles, the weaker focus on modding support, and the weird corporatization of the more modern games makes me like this older, scrappier game a lot more. I think you can probably guess what the answer is to this, but I'm going to answer whether or not I think this game is worth your time today. Yes. Look, man, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. This game is fucking tits. Take away my nostalgia for a second, and I will give you a few key reasons why I think this game is worth your time if you want to get into Total War, if you want to get into RTS games, and if you want to get into PC games in general. Unlike a lot of other PC games from this time, it's not too hard to figure out, especially within the RTS and grand strategy genres. The tutorial is intuitive, well, okay, the battle part is. The campaign tutorial actually broke on me when trying to get footage for it. Even if you skip the tutorial, the game isn't too hard to pick up and understand. If there's an aspect you don't get, this game has a dedicated cult following, and you will probably be able to find the answer on forums, Reddit, YouTube, anywhere you can see that this game has an excellent fan community. I would also say that this game is an excellent jumping off point for people who want to get into the RTS genre or the grand strategy genre. From here, I jumped into Crusader Kings 2, Dawn of War 1, a little bit of Supreme Commander on the side, and of course other Total War games. And if this does convince you to delve deeper into the series, there are so many serious gems from both before and after that you will no doubt come to love. Even with some of the problems I have with Total Warhammer, I still do love the shit out of it for what it is. Granted, Medieval 2 was the last mainline Total War game that used the old engine before Empire started using the new engine that current fans all know and, well, tolerate. This means that the games are different on a fidelity side, a technical performance side, and most controversially, a modding side. One of the reasons why I think this game is great for anybody who wants to start getting into PC gaming is it's an excellent entry point for getting into modding. There are so many mods on ModDB and Total War Center that it's staggering. From small gameplay fixes to flat out overhauls of the mechanics, graphics, and even setting. Here are a few examples. One of my favorites is the Total Vanilla Beyond, which is more of a touch-up for the main game. It adds provinces that weren't in the main game, as well as factions such as Ireland, Lithuania, Armenia, and many more. This isn't the most historically accurate mod, as it has the Mongol invasion and discovery of the New World happen as early as turn 2 in the 11th century, but it's still very fun to play, especially for somebody who doesn't like the more ludicrous mods that you can find out there. If you're looking for something that's a bit tougher, then Stainless Steel is a classic within the community. An absolute massive map that adds new factions, completely revitalizes certain faction rosters, gives them historically accurate icons, and it's more slow-paced. Really good for somebody who's really good at vanilla, but also wants to go a bit deeper. Zardam's Total War is slowly becoming one of my favorite mods, as it takes place during the 14th century within the Balkans, going into the various religious conflicts, Italian interference, Hungarian hegemony, expanding Ottoman and Tartar influence, and more. My only real complaint is that this mod has some performance issues, especially in the battles, if there's a lot of units, which, considering the fact that I have a 3050 Ti, and this game is as old as I was when I first started playing it, that's a bit questionable. Not a fan of historical stuff, or even medieval Europe? There are mods for the Elder Scrolls, Lord of the Rings, Mount and Blade, Game of Thrones, even Warhammer before CA got the rights to it. I didn't get any footage of that stuff because this video has already taken several hours of my life, and besides, the more I look at the ModDB page for this game, the further down I feel like I'm being dragged into the abyss, so I will leave it there for my own safety. My point is, Medieval 2 Total War is fucking amazing. There are some issues, like two-handed weapon units having animations that are so long that they're vulnerable to units that they should be killing. The only campaign out of the Kingdoms expansion that I really enjoy is the Teutonic one, and only for a short time. And of course, the game definitely looks like a 2006 RTS game. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. Still, those are nitpicks, and I only brought them out because from a gameplay standpoint, I have nothing else to complain about. Get this game. Like, right now. It goes on sale pretty often, too. And it runs on a potato. Modding goofiness may vary, though. And if this leads you to eventually getting into the series as a whole, well, that's just pretty dang neat, if you ask me. All right, so that is the third episode in this series done, and I want to thank everybody who has subbed to the channel. I am now over 100 subscribers, which is pretty fucking awesome. And you know what? I've just been enjoying myself, just taking my time with it, which is why I haven't really been releasing a lot of content all at once. I just, whenever I get in the mood, and yeah, I've just been kind of enjoying myself. I also want to give a shout out to my friend Pyrai, who made the awesome PNGs that I've been using as sort of a PNG tuber. If you want to follow them, feel free to follow them on Twitter. They also do Twitch, and just go check them out. They are an excellent human being. Well, an excellent squid. Lastly, I decided I'm going to end these videos with a little Q&A session just for fun, and I already have 2 questions. One from my friend Amber, who simply asks, "Can you scare me?" Boom, motherfucker. See? I'm great at this shit. And Peanut, who simply asks, "Switch axe?" Switch axe? More like swag axe. Yeah. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for coming out. Goodbye.